As the months unfolded, I entered what I can only describe as the radiant state. Energy no longer felt like something I was storing. It felt like something I had become. My awareness expanded beyond the limits of the body. There was a quiet electricity in everything: people, trees, light, even silence itself. I began to sense that retention was not the act of holding energy inside me, but the act of dissolving the boundaries between myself and energy itself. It was as though the current that moved within was the same current that moved through the stars. That realization didn't inflate, it humbled me. I was not generating power. I was aligning with it. This alignment brought intuition, so sharp, it felt like foresight. Decisions that once required thought now arose effortlessly from stillness. The mind had become a receiver rather than a reactor. I could sense the right direction, the right word, the right action before reason could explain it. It was as if consciousness had switched from effort to flow. The retained energy had refined my perception until it resonated with the intelligence that orchestrates life itself. What people call luck or coincidence was now simply correspondence, the outer world mirroring inner order. With that came a new kind of magnetism. I no longer sought to attract. Attraction happened naturally. People leaned closer when I spoke. Not because my words were special, but because my presence was undivided. There is a gravity in coherence. Everything disordered longs to orbit it. I realized that leadership has nothing to do with control, it is resonance. When your energy is stable, others calibrate to it. The room quiets, the chaos softens, the direction becomes clear. Retention had turned me into an axis, not by force, but by frequency. Creativity deepened it too. Ideas arrived like currents of light, complete, precise, urgent. I could feel inspiration, not as random flashes, but as a steady stream waiting to be channeled. The same energy that once pushed outward through lust now pushed upward through imagination. The urge to create, to build, to express became irresistible. I understood why great artists and inventors spoke of muses and divine madness. They were describing the ascent of the same current. Sexual energy, when transmuted, becomes the architect of new realities. Yet even in this brilliance, the temptation of pride returned. Subtle and seductive. It whispered, "You have achieved mastery. You are different now." But I had learned to recognize that it was the ego feeding on light. True mastery, I reminded myself, is invisible. It asks for no recognition because it is recognition, the recognition of unity. So I practiced humility, grounding myself in service, in gratitude, in ordinary acts done with extraordinary presence. For the moment one believes himself above others, the current withdraws. Energy favors the humble vessel. There were times when the power felt almost overwhelming, a current too vast for a single form. In those moments, I turned to silence, to breath, to grounding in the body. Retention had not made me ethereal. It had made me aware that the divine requires an anchor. The seed is both earth and sky. Without grounding, radiance becomes volatility. So I walked slowly, spoke gently, listened deeply. I learned that the more intense the light, the softer the expression must become. Now, when I look back, I see that retention was never about asceticism. It was about it. It tuned my body into an instrument capable of receiving higher frequencies of consciousness. It turned instinct into intuition, attraction into influence, and desire into devotion. And in that transformation, I found the essence of the alchemist's art, to take what is common and make it sacred, to turn the impulse that once enslaved into the force that enlightens. The radiant state is not an escape from the human, it is the fulfillment of it. As the current of this practice matured within me, I began to see that retention was not an end, it was a beginning. It was the initiation into a greater rhythm of life, one that connects every act, every thought, every breath to purpose. The fire I once struggled to contain now burned quietly at the center of my being, not as passion, but as presence. It illuminated my choices, softened my edges, and expanded my compassion. I no longer viewed energy as something to guard jealously, but as something to share consciously. The true alchemist, I realized, is not one who hoards gold, but one who uses it to light the path for others. The more I grew in this understanding, the more life invited me to give what I had gained. People began to ask not about retention, but about peace, focus, and direction. They could sense something stable, and they wanted to know how to find it in themselves. I told them not to chase power, but to cultivate stillness, not to resist desire, but to understand it. For retention, when misunderstood, becomes ego's game of superiority. But when understood rightly, it is love's discipliner. Commitment to refining one's inner light so it may illuminate others. I found joy in teaching what I had learned, not through words, but through example, through the quiet transmission of presence. In that sharing, something beautiful unfolded. My relationships deepened in authenticity. I no longer needed to prove worth or hide weakness. Retention had dissolved the old patterns of performance and attachment. I could love without needing, give without losing, and stand alone without loneliness. The energy that once demanded release now found expression in kindness, patience, and vision. This was the golden state, not celibacy, not control, but equilibrium. A man balanced between heaven and earth, rooted yet radiant. The seed had completed its transmutation. It had become consciousness itself. There were moments of solitude that felt almost sacred, where silence wrapped around me like a cloak. In those moments, I could feel the pulse of existence itself, the same pulse that beats in every living being. Retention had tuned me to this universal rhythm. I began to perceive all of life as an exchange of sacred energy, each interaction an opportunity to elevate rather than deplete, to harmonize rather than dominate. This was no longer about masculine power. It was about divine balance. The masculine and feminine, the solar and lunar, the seed and the soil all danced together in eternal union. I started to live more slowly, more deliberately. I chose my words with care, my actions with intention. I no longer sought the next thrill, the next high, or the next conquest. Life itself had become enough. The miracle was in breathing, in creating, in simply being aware. In that simplicity, I found freedom deeper than pleasure, an unshakable peace that radiated outward without effort. Retention, I saw now, was not about abstaining from life, but about engaging it fully, with the heart unclouded and the mind aligned with its source. Sometimes I would remember the man I once was, the restless seeker, the distracted wanderer, the one who mistook intensity for intimacy. I would smile, not with regret but with gratitude. For without that hunger, I would not have found this wholeness. The path of retention had been a crucible, burning away illusions until only essence remained. And in that essence, I recognized something eternal, that the energy I had guarded so fiercely was never meant to be owned. It was meant to be honored. To live as its vessel is to live as part of the divine design, flowing, balanced, and awake. Now, I move through the world quietly, carrying the unseen flame. I no longer speak of retention often, for words can only point to what must be lived. But those who are ready to remember can feel it, the still fire, the calm intensity, the grounded grace. They sense that I am not withholding energy, but radiating it, not controlling desire, but consecrating it. And when they ask what changed me, I tell them only this: I learned to keep what life gave me sacred, to turn impulse into insight, and to let the seed become light. As I ventured further into this path, I began to realize that retention was not merely a discipline, it was a remembrance of eternity. For within every pulse of contained energy lies the memory of creation itself. The seed is not just biological matter. It is the living blueprint of existence. It carries the same intelligence that forged galaxies and breathed consciousness into form. When we waste it unconsciously, we forget our divine ancestry. But when we preserve it with reverence, we reawaken the dialogue between mortal and immortal, between man and the infinite. This is the hidden scripture, written not in words, but in vibration, the gospel of energy that speaks directly to the soul. In my stillness, I often felt that energy whispered truths that no philosophy could articulate. It told me that life does not end, it only transforms, that energy never dies, it only changes form. The same current that animates a man flows through the stars above him. To retain it consciously is to participate in the continuity of creation, to taste the essence of immortality while still in flesh. I understood then that the great masters of every age were not seeking eternal life in time, they were remembering it in consciousness. Retention had become that remembrance for me, the sacred act of aligning with the timeless force within. As this awareness deepened, fear began to dissolve, the fear of loss, of aging, of death. For how can one fear dissolution when one has felt the indestructible essence within? The body ages, the mind evolves, but the current remains pure, silent, unbroken. In that realization, I felt both infinite and insignificant. Infinite because I was part of something eternal. Insignificant because I was but a vessel through which eternity passed. That paradox birthed peace, a peace untouched by circumstance, unshaken by change. I began to live with a sense of sacred responsibility, knowing that every thought, every word, every touch carried the weight of creation itself. Retention had taught me that energy is the most honest currency in the universe. What you spend, you become. What you save, you amplify. What you refine, you radiate. So I chose to spend only on what was true, to give only where growth was possible, to create only what carried beauty and meaning. Each day became an offering, each act a signature of consciousness stamped upon the world. And it struck me then, this is legacy. Not the monuments we build or the names we leave behind, but the vibration we imprint upon existence. Every moment lived with mastery adds coherence to the collective field. Every thought of clarity becomes a beacon in the invisible web of life. Retention was no longer just my personal transformation, it was my contribution to the evolution of consciousness itself. In a world fragmented by distraction, every man who masters his energy becomes an anchor of order, a silent guardian of balance. I began to see that the true purpose of this path is not to withdraw from the world but to infuse it with higher awareness. The retained energy is not meant to stay locked within the self. It is meant to circulate through service, creativity, and love. That is how the current completes its divine circuit from desire, to discipline, to devotion, to dissemination. The circle closes, and in that closure, energy becomes eternal. This, I realized, is the immortality that sages spoke of, not the preservation of body, but the perpetuation of consciousness through aligned creation. And so, I live now not as one who seeks enlightenment but as one who serves it. The light I once searched for is the light I now carry, quietly, simply, in the rhythm of breath, in the steadiness of thought, in the generosity of heart. Retention has become not an effort but a nature, not a practice but a pulse. I no longer need to remind myself to conserve energy because I have become the energy itself, wake, radiant, and free. There came a time when I stopped asking why I had chosen this path. The question itself dissolved. It was no longer about purpose I had to find, but purpose I had to become. Through retention, the layers of illusion, ambition, validation, lust, and fear had been burned away, leaving only essence. And essence doesn't chase, it emanates. The energy I once restrained had refined itself into will and iron will, not of resistance, but of direction. Life no longer happened to me, it flowed through me. In that current, I sensed destiny not as a scripted fate but as a collaboration with the divine. Each day, I began to see my actions as notes in a cosmic symphony. A conversation, a thought, a simple act of patience, all were frequencies contributing to a grand orchestration. Semen retention had tuned me to hear that symphony. What once felt like isolation now revealed itself as intimacy with the source. I realized that destiny was never about control. It was about alignment. When energy is scattered, life feels random. When energy is unified, life feels guided. I was no longer trying to manipulate outcomes. I was listening, responding, participating. My purpose was not a destination, it was the quality of my vibration in each moment. In this awareness, desire transformed once again. What began as biological craving had become creative, longing, a yearning not to possess but to express, not to consume but to contribute. Retention had alchemized instinct into inspiration. I started to feel a calling. Not to preach this path but to embody it so completely that my presence itself could remind others of their hidden potential. I understood then why the ancient mystics spoke of living light. It is not a metaphor, it is the literal radiance that emerges when the seed of energy blossoms into wisdom. I noticed the world differently too. The chaos that once disturbed me now looked like a field of unrefined potential. Every person chasing pleasure, every restless mind, every distracted heart, they were all seekers in disguise, yearning for the same reunion I had found. It humbled me. I stopped judging and started seeing. The lost, the indulgent, the broken, they were fragments of myself at earlier stages of the journey. Compassion replaced critique. I no longer saw humanity as fallen. I saw it as unfolding. Each man who learns to retain and transmute his energy contributes to this collective awakening. We are not individuals ascending, we are a species remembering. It became clear that semen retention is not only a masculine discipline but a universal principle. It is the art of containment before creation, the pause before the word, the silence before the sound. Every form of mastering music, art, invention, love follows this rhythm. Gather, gestate, give. To retain energy is to respect that rhythm, to give life the chance to mature within us before we release it into the world. This is how destiny refines itself, through patience, through precision, through sacred timing. The seed that waits becomes the tree that lasts. The more I lived this truth, the more life aligned with grace. Opportunities appeared effortlessly. Connections deepened without strategy, creation flowed without strain. It was as if existence rewarded coherence. I realized that semen retention was never meant to isolate me from pleasure but to reveal the deeper pleasure of harmony when thought, desire, and purpose move as one. I had not become detached from the world. I had become attuned to it. The divine was no longer a distant ideal but the pulse behind every moment, the breath behind every breath. And now, when I look at my reflection, I see not the man who started this journey, but the man who emerged from it humbled, grounded, illuminated. The seed I once sought to master had mastered me in return, teaching me to live deliberately, love fearlessly, and act purposefully. The world remains full of temptation, but temptation has lost its spell. My will is not made of denial but of discernment. My energy is not a cage but a current, and in that current I move toward my destiny steady, awake, eternal. As my practice deepened, I began to sense the feminine, not as temptation, but as revelation. She was no longer a test of restraint, but a mirror of the universe's nurturing force. I realized that the energy I had been guarding was, in truth, yearning to unite, not in lust, but in consciousness. Retention had refined my perception to see beyond form. Every woman, every curve of nature, every wave of emotion became an expression of the same creative principle. Shakti, the sacred motion of life itself. And I, through discipline, had become Shiva, the stillness that holds her dance. The meeting of these forces within me was the true alchemy, not the suppression of desire, but the sanctification of it. In that inner union, something astonishing unfolded. I began to experience love as a frequency, rather than a feeling. It was everywhere, in sunlight, in silence, in the rhythm of breath. The world pulsed with a tenderness I had never seen before, because now I was not looking at life. I was looking as life. Retention had bridged the gap between seeker and sought, between observer and observed. The energy once spent outward now expanded inward, illuminating the divine polarity within. I understood then that the feminine outside us only becomes sacred when we have first reconciled the feminine within the intuitive, the receptive, the creative. There was a night, I remember vividly, quiet, moonlit, timeless. I sat alone, yet felt surrounded by 1,000 presences. It was as if the entire cosmos was breathing with me. In that stillness, I saw the feminine as the shimmering thread weaving all existence together, while the masculine was the loom that held the pattern steady. Both were necessary, both divine. Retention had not divided me from women. It had reunited me with the essence from which both man and woman arise, pure consciousness expressing itself through polarity. From that night onward, I began to live differently with the feminine world, not as conqueror, not as worshiper, but as co-creator. My gaze softened, my words carried reverence instead of desire. I could meet a woman's eyes and feel the same sacred current that flowed through my meditations, a current that had no agenda, only awareness. And I realized this was the secret the ancients encoded in their myths of gods and goddesses. In the dance of Shiva and Shakti, in the lotus that blooms from still water, retention was the key to seeing creation, not as separation, but as sacred union. The more I lived from this union, the more harmonious life became. Conflict faded because polarity was no longer war, but music. Each difference a note in divine composition. I no longer feared the feminine, nor did I seek to dominate it. I harmonized with it, whether in relationships, in creativity, or in the cycles of nature. I moved with respect for the ebb and flow, the giving and receiving. I realized then that true masculinity is not control, it is containment with compassion. True femininity is not submission, it is surrender to harmony. Together, they sustain creation itself. And as this understanding crystallized, my practice transcended the personal. I was no longer retaining for strength or magnetism, not even for discipline or clarity. I was retaining to remember. To remember that the same force that rises in desire is the one that animates stars, gives birth to life, and whispers through silence. When I preserve that energy consciously, I am preserving my connection to the source, to her, to it, to all. This was no longer about man or woman, sacred or profane, ascetic or sensual. It was about integration, the realization that everything is divine when seen through the eyes of awareness. So now, when the world tempts me with its beauty, I do not turn away. I honor it. I let its radiance remind me of the source it reflects. Retention has given me the eyes to see the divine in all forms, to touch without taking, to love without losing, to give without depleting. The feminine is no longer my distraction. She is my completion, my teacher, my reflection of the infinite. In her presence, I am not the man who resists. I am the man who remembers. There came a morning when I awoke and felt no boundary between myself and the world. The air that entered my lungs felt like a continuation of my own breath. The sunlight didn't just fall upon me, it moved through me, as if I were transparent to life itself. In that moment, I understood what all the sages meant when they spoke of union, enlightenment, liberation. It was not something to be achieved, but something to be remembered. Semen retention had not given me power over my energy. It had given me remembrance of who I am, energy itself, eternal and indestructible. All the striving, the discipline, the long nights of silence and solitude, they were never about becoming something more. They were about stripping away everything that was not me. I had mistaken the fire of desire as my weakness, but it was my teacher all along. It taught me that energy, in its raw form, is innocent. It only becomes destructive when it lacks consciousness. Retention was the act of restoring that consciousness, of returning energy to awareness. When awareness touches energy, energy becomes light, and in that light, I dissolved. There was no me holding back, no me controlling or transmuting. There was only flow, effortless, sacred, complete. The current that once rose from my root and spiraled upward through discipline now moved freely, an unbroken river of gold. I could feel it in every heartbeat, in every blink, in every pause between thoughts. I had become the circulation itself, the marriage of heaven and earth within a single vessel. It was then I saw the truth. Retention was never about withholding. It was about becoming whole. In this wholeness, the fear of loss vanished completely. I no longer saw the body as fragile or the world as fleeting. Life was a dance of energy, appearing, dissolving, reappearing, yet always one continuous movement. Death itself felt like a shift of rhythm, not an end. When you live with your energy in harmony, death has nothing to take away. You are already infinite. The alchemist's gold is not in what you own or achieve, but in the quality of your consciousness and how purely you hold the divine current within. The women who once triggered desire now evoked reverence. The men who once competed with me now appeared as brothers on the same journey. The world I once resisted now appeared as a field of mirrors, each reflecting my own essence back to me in 1,000 forms. The seed had returned to the soil of the infinite, and from it blossomed a calm radiance. I carried it not as a doctrine, but as a presence. People would ask me how I seemed so peaceful, so magnetic, so alive, and I would smile gently, knowing that the answer could not be spoken, only lived. For in the end, retention is not about celibacy, not about control, not even about transmutation. It is about remembrance. To retain is to remember the sacredness of what flows through you. To transmute is to realize that nothing is lost, only transformed. And to live in mastery is to live in service of that transformation, moment by moment, breath by breath, seed by seed. Now, I walk through life with quiet gratitude, carrying the awareness that everything I once sought, power, peace, love, purpose, was never outside of me. It was always contained in the seed, waiting to be awakened through awareness. I have become the alchemist and the gold, the question and the answer, the fire and the light. The journey is complete, yet endlessly beginning. For every breath I take, every spark of life I feel, whispers the eternal truth. The seed was never just creation's potential, it was creation itself. Before we conclude, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and do not forget to drop your location in the comment side. Love to know where you are watching from. And if you ever have any questions, join our Telegram channel where we interact directly and help each other grow. The link is in the description. Please share video to your dear one. Have a powerful day.